Hello, Jamie.
Good morning, Kathy. Good morning.
And wow, what a week it has been. In your writing has been utterly prolific and um, feels like so much to talk about today.
Well,
So, yeah,
yes,
carry on.
I have been on quite a tear writing things, great volumes of things, and I hope people have enjoyed it. I hope people have gotten something from it. Today's piece, today being Saturday, was very kind of organic, and at the end, the question, would you want to see this as a book? Or is it fine as is or whatever? And so far the response has been, oh yeah, please do. So we'll see where that goes. But I guess that's a good place to start.
Yeah, let's talk about today's essay.
Aye, sure, why not?
Yeah. Or this week's. What the one? Let's think about the book. What would the book look like? What would you envisage in the book?
Well, I think over the course of the last few weeks, you and I speaking, we've kind of acknowledged, accepted that we've really been talking more about processing in general, the brain in general,
Yeah.
the landscape, the field in general, than just language. I know professionally, you're a language therapist. Professionally, I teach language, right? But we're really talking about an ecology. And so, from that standpoint, something that I wrote in 2022 about classroom ecologies having to do with kind of autistic behaviors and stuff and alexithymia
Hmm.
sprung into my head again, as it always tends to do. And talking about ecologies and Gestalt processing as an ecology, as
Hmm.
a cognition, sovereign, not a dysfunctional analytic processor, not something that needs to be remedied, but something
Mm.
that is, an original state, a default
Yeah.
state, and that we are not defective analytics. We are perfectly capable Gestalt processors, and kind of agreeing that I don't necessarily like the term, but I don't want to ditch it because I want the connection to the lineage, the Gestalt philosophy, and all of the people that have come before. I don't want to divorce myself from that or the work from that. So it's kind of it's comfortable for now, I guess.
Mm. And I guess when we uh, think about what most folks, so for me as a speech and language, going back to what you were saying as a speech and language therapist, I was taught in university that language arrives piece by piece. But we know through our conversations and through my work that I do on a day-to-day basis and my sharing with other colleagues worldwide that actually it isn't just about piece by piece, that minds, how they are processing in wholes. And and so is it just then that the language is then catching up? What do you feel?
I don't know necessarily the language is catching up. I think we start with the whole,
Yeah, yeah.
right? We start with the whole of it and the meaning of it and all of this stuff. And even Teresa, my wife, she has trouble understanding this. When I say something to her like, I was in love with you the day I met you. I would have married you that day, right? She can't understand that because she's not a Gestalt processor, she's not autistic, right? And so I tried to explain it to her that meaning comes first, not last, right? And so for me, and the way that my brain works, the Gestalt way or whatever, I can see the entirety of it. And then, when we talk about relationships and stuff, in the past, people have chipped away at meaning by prejudices, by, mean words or whatever. And so then we start in love and we fall out of love via evidence, right? Whole to part. So the whole arrives before the steps. The whole concept arrives before the words do.
Mm.
And I trust the patterns. To me, that's the proof. And then the translation for me is to put it into plain English, right? Or German or whatever I'm writing in.
Yeah.
And so I write a lot and use the word constellation because oftentimes it takes me 6 articles, it takes me 10 articles because these are parts of a constellation. You know, your initial question required 7 essays, right, in a constellation. And then from that standpoint, I think I've written 20 more and I'm still not
Mm,
satisfied with the answer. And so, you know, this gets all philosophical, and I try not to put my college professor, philosophy hat on, but most people are taught a certain form, right?
mm,
Moves linear, right? Chronos rules the land. But
yeah.
for Gestalt processors, our brains don't operate in chronos. We operate in kairos. We have recursivity, we have this wholeness, we have this meaning time that works backwards and forwards, right? And so sometimes I find that something pops in my head, my brain has responded to some kind of weather pattern or whatever that I cannot understand. I don't understand it. I'm speaking, right? My process of using technology to help me. I'm just kind of babbling at the computer, and I use Google Notebook LM, and it assembles all of these kind of random snippets and stuff. And then I ask it to make a mind map for me, and it makes a mind map. And sometimes it's like, Jamie, I don't know what the hell you're doing here. Right? So it just kind of throws an error, you know. But it is a trusted friend at this point that I pay for.
Mm,
But eventually I just kind of, okay, here's some coherence on what I've put together, I think, and I'll write it. And I won't be happy with it, but it's there. And
mm.
then 10 days later, a month later, 3 years later, something happens in my life that when you view it against the thing that I wrote previous now makes perfect sense. So
Mhm.
essentially my brain in Kairos is writing the relational field necessary for something that will happen in the future to land in. And then it will make perfect sense. Um, and it happens, kind of retroactive, like something makes sense to me. Like today's article, when I wrote it, I think maybe a week and a half ago, um, my brain was rethinking something I wrote about classroom behaviors and alexithymia in 2022, right? And so it basically woke up and said, "Oh wait, hang on a minute, I think there's something else there."
Mm,
And then it dumps, this entire whole piece, and I have to make sense of it.
mm.
But as I was working through it, and as I'm again kind of barking at the computer, um, I begin to notice like I'm not writing an article here. I'm writing an outline for a book. Oh crap. Right. Do I want to do this? And so at the end, I ask a question, would you want a book like this? And so it eventually becomes sections and parts and chapters and whatnot. And of course, we mentioned the lineage and natural language acquisition frameworks and Marge's work and so on. Um, and then, I bring back some of that psycholinguistics research and
Mm,
stuff that I did earlier in the week about multimodal gestalts and the word itself as a whole gestalt, and I've also noticed that Notebook has, because it's multilingual, like the Google space is multilingual and it auto detects, it's now returning things to me in languages that I've given it, right?
interesting.
Um, so when I mention ein Augenblick, right, it's now kind of anticipating like, hey, some of these words in the languages that you speak at me would be more appropriate in this space, right? And so a little bit of that is kind of filtering into my writings as well. And I do mention it, I call it out like, I'm using this word because, it makes more sense. Or with the Schachemann's work on that kind of compressed world into a whole,
Mm,
just a single word. Um, because I want people to be able to find the research, and I figure people that are reading his research are searching in Russian language script, and so I would put the parentheses and then it written out in Cyrillic and so on to try to maintain the fidelity of that. Um, but I don't know. I'm trying to capture a part of something that is magnificent in its whole,
yeah.
and I'm feeling incredibly inadequate in doing it. Right. But I
Really?
think I think
Is
there's that. kind of echolalia part that kind of I keep repeating it and hopefully it sticks, right? And that's a bit of how I integrate things, that repetition of things. And so this was me kind of thinking out loud. Like if I had to name it, if I had to define it, and not for everybody, right? Not for every just this is me thinking about me. And that's all
Mhm.
this really ever has been. I've never tried to section off anything. I've never tried to enclose anything and say this is what it must be. This just me writing from the inside. And um, so I'm telling you, like for me, time works
Yeah.
different. You know, I can enter into a gestalt from a childhood, and it's as fresh as it was then. You know.
And I guess the things that you're writing, that you're thinking about are a great support for others, whether they're the adult Gestalt language processors in understanding themselves. I mean, I think that is something that I guess until I met you, till we've had these conversations, that actually I'm very focused on children and young people, hadn't really, like you say, hadn't thought about a world of adult Gestalt language processors until I met you. And I feel that not only does your voice and your messages really enhance my understanding and concept of Gestalt processing, Gestalt language processing, but also supports other adults who may never have been able to conceptualize how they process until some of your writing.
That's a bit
Yeah.
of responsibility there, but um,
Well,
I think part of that, and I thank you for that very kind way of putting it. I think a lot of that began when I became a teacher,
mm,
of primary and secondary school, right? I'd been an adult teacher for a long time, college and whatnot, but um, the onboarding to that, all of the information they gave me about the way people are was wrong.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely fundamentally wrong. Not in relation to what it was talking about, but in relation to me. And so that's where No Place for Autism comes from. That's where holistic language instruction comes from. And then, my current placement and kind of arguments with colleagues, that's where decolonizing language education comes from. That, the teaching of English is assimilationist, that we expect the children to go home and assimilate English into their family and convert their family to English. And it's simply not true, and it doesn't happen that way. And that there are people coming to America, to California, where I'm at, that have no intention of doing anything than learning English as kind of a tourist tool. And so we have to teach that as a foreign language. We have to treat our school as a foreign place. And that there will be Gestalt processors in that mix. And my own practice demonstrates that, of course, there are. And I've written kind of the decoder ring for the Substack about how to tease that information out of data sets in special education.
Mm,
Um, but I think, you know, when you grow up and you're just told that you're stupid, that you cannot learn, right? And I tell students in the beginning, like I come out to them as a GLP, as an autistic person, not because I'm trying to get attention from them or pity or whatever, but because I think there's an impression amongst children that their teachers are like infallible. They're gods and goddesses, and that they're
oh,
speaking from on high and they have this magnificent authority. And so I kind of take the piss out of myself by saying, like, no, when I was your age, I was illiterate. I'm sorry. When I was your age, the only way I made it from class to class, passing grades, was because I cheated, right? I traded protection, because I'm a very large individual, for being able to cheat off smart kids who were getting bullied, right? And all of these kinds of things. And they're very shocked when they hear that, They I think about how many times I've started over economically as I've moved around the world.
mm,
And that's a very difficult thing to do, especially as a Gestalt processor, especially when, I'm now in a foreign world. I'm in a foreign language. I'm in a foreign place. I'm starting over. And some of the lessons that I've learned about that. Um,
mm.
and I think I've done that 12 times in my life, which is a lot. right? And I didn't want that to
Yeah.
happen to anybody really, but that I came of age as an adult, as a Gestalt processor, as an autistic person, without the words for that. And I did not know when I was in it just how different I was, right? And then all of my first, I would say, 15 adult years, I was literate. I have functional literacy. I had sight words and I can kind of navigate my way through. But my first car that I bought, I was cheated. My first jobs that I got, I was cheated because I kind of read the contract and I didn't realize I was being tricked. Um, but also on the other side of that, I came into the service of a Scottish chief as a bodyguard and a ghillie. And I found that I was very good at my job because of that pattern recognition, because of that kind of autistic GLP spidey sense, relational field and tuning and stuff. I was very good at my job. But it's not a career, right? And I think, in history, my family coming from, Scotland, UK, etc., that the disabled across time were always put into service, right? So someone like me would be a footman, somebody like me would be a chambermaid or something like that. It didn't require
Oh,
reading, it
yeah.
didn't require smarts, but you're taken care of, right? The laird would make sure you're fed and housed and stuff, and you would live your life that way. And I thought about how that applies to modern life, how we kind of consign people like I was to a life of kind of mediocrity. And I don't want that for my children. I don't want that for my students. I want them to be growing up in a full knowledge of how their system works. So
Mm.
as a ground state, not as a defective thing, and here's how you can overcome your deficiency, mind you, but let's start from the beginning. Your epistemology, your ontology, Gestalt mind is sovereign, is perfect. It's built for purpose, right? It's fit for
Yeah.
purpose. And so, if you're a parent and this is your child, right?
Yeah.
Stop demanding instant words, right? Stop translating every silence as defiance, right? And I
Yeah.
think that comes from white families more than others, right? Listen to me when
Mm.
I'm talking to you. Respect me. Tell me immediately. And a GLP child is sitting there stunned because they have no access to the scripts because they're emotionally shut down and overwhelmed, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and from the standpoint of, I love Peppa Pig, right? I still do. It's like, don't quote me Peppa Pig, use your own words. And they don't understand, like, that is their words, but they felt this was perfect for it, and then, from the adult standpoint, helping people understand themselves, like I had to do from
Yeah.
scratch, right? And I was almost 50 years old when I found Marge's work, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm noticing things, frameworks, and oh wow, this is great. And my mind is going nuts over all of
Yeah.
this new information. And I'm not a speech therapist, right? But I understand frameworks, I understand workflows. And I'm thinking to myself, oh crap, I'm in stage 3 and I'm almost 50, right? And how do I realized I had gained some more literacy and all of that kind of stuff. And then using that framework on myself, because there really aren't no, my speech and language work was done in occupational therapy because I was an adult. And my
Mm.
occupational therapist had no idea what to do with me. And so the recommendation was improv theater, right? And oddly enough, the way things work, because of that work in improv theater, not just in speech and stuff, but that's how I ended up in forensics. So it's kind of a weird kind of connections thing. But I had fun in there because there was no expectations. It was silly. It was, whatever. And so I could
Mm.
hoover up scripts from the people around me. And that kind of translation labor that goes on in your head as you're trying to figure out the right things to say, a lot of that barrier was removed in improv. And
Mm.
so I think, and also being Gen X, we didn't care if we were silly, right? Today's children, they're so worried about image and, TikToks and whatnot, but we didn't have mobiles,
No.
recording our every move and stuff like that, And then I think about, that occupational therapist and, people in your profession, my profession, right? If you have no idea that this exists,
Mm.
then a lot of what you're doing is wrong, right?
Mm.
And so I mentioned that today's piece came from my mind reorganizing, rethinking about a 2022 piece. And that came from kind of my first year at my current school, where I'm seeing a behaviorist working with an autistic student who's completely out of control, the student, and she does not know what to do with him. And so I'm new there. She knows I'm autistic, so she asks me, professionally, like, what would you do with the child? And so
Yeah.
I said, I don't know, right? But is he alexithymic? I know he's autistic, but is he alexithymic? And she had no idea what I was talking about.
No.
And sometimes I can get blunt and when I'm stressed or whatever. And I said, ma'am, if you don't know what alexithymia is, why are you working with autistic children? And she took me as being rude, and I probably was. But I took a moment and I kind of observed things and the whole class and just how I felt in the class and stuff. It was very hectic. And so I can tell he's obviously overstimulated and stuff. And so I asked the boy, um, he was in the eighth grade at the time, come outside with me. And I introduced myself because I was there to visit because he was on my caseload. It's a brand new caseload for me, a brand new school. And I introduced myself. Hi, I'm Dr. Horrocks. You can call me Dr. H if you can navigate that name, right? And I'm standing there and I'm leaning against the outside wall and it's stucco. It's lots of little raised pieces and stuff. And for me, it's a stim. And so I'm explaining to him, I say, young man, notice how I'm standing here. I'm standing here and I'm just kind of rubbing the wall. And you may think, what's Dr. H on about? But I was just in your classroom. It's madness in there. It's overwhelming for my system. I'm autistic. And right now I'm using this little bit of pain, a little bit of pressure on the stucco wall to kind of focus my attention and regulate so I can calm myself down. Would you like to try it? And so he did. And it's like, oh, wow, Dr. H, that actually kind of works. Right. And we became besties at that point. And I'm going to cry in June when he graduates from high school with top marks. Right. He's a wonderful young man. But that piece, that behaviorist kind of critique that I wrote in 2022, I submitted it all around to all the journals, and it was very well referenced and everything, and it was all rejected because it didn't fit the current form. And so that's the piece that landed me on Substack. It's like, well, I don't know what to do with this, but it has to go somewhere. And so that
Mm.
was, my drive to get to Substack. So that whole thing kind of my head, like it triggered like, what do I need to do about this? That particular
Mm.
student, that particular thing, and just kind of an explanation and how my practice as a case manager has evolved over time to now, with the professional safety of lifetime tenure and lifetime credential, I can kind of be myself, in reporting and stuff, and I can say things that I want to not get fired now, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of fun, but explaining to parents like this is epistemology, this is the way of knowing of your child, this is how they make meaning. Yes, it's political because it challenges the book publishers, it challenges psychology and psychiatry, you know, um, but it
But do you
is a
not
primary
find,
mode of
yeah,
human cognition. I don't know how else to say that,
yeah.
right?
But I guess in in my world, as you say, I'm a speech and language therapist. I don't feel like I know more than the families, those particularly those parents that of GLPs that I'm supporting. It's that they arrive and know and understand their child's processing much better than I do. I might suggest some strategies. I might suggest, hey, maybe we just need to shut up and not say anything for this session and just be and just take a big step back, and that might be the advice or suggestion that I make. But invariably I think what you're saying about parents is probably they must come and feel great relief because they knew their child, they didn't know maybe how to put it into words, and what you do is bridge that so that the parent knows their child, they know that their child or young person that that they're parenting is processing in a way that they don't know how to describe, but they understand it intrinsically, and then somehow you're putting it into words for them and with a plan, with a future, with attunement, with kindness, with safety, with that thinking of that person as a whole, every bit of their experience, which must be such a great relief for so many of the families of the young people that you support.
Wow. My goodness. I don't know what to say to that. I think, part of it is just kind of Scottish sensibility, right? The kind of Gaelic welcome of, here's a cup of tea, have a seat. Would you like a bite to eat? Okay, what are you doing? What do you need? Right? And creating that kind of ecology of care rather than, demanding up front, what do you want? Why are you here? Whatever. Um, and I've always kind of been that way. I know I get teased a bit by my wife about my promiscuity, but I'm generous. I give all of this stuff for free. If somebody wants my book and can afford it, I'll give them an electronic copy, or I'll tell them how to arrange it from their library and stuff. I am generous to a fault, I think. And that's just the way I was raised, that kind of ecology of my grandmother's garden and my grandmother's cottage, and, just sitting down to a cup of tea, hers having a bit more rum than mine, and just sorting the day out and having a chat and enjoying the time in the garden. And I think from that standpoint, that's kind of the ecology that I try to create in my classroom and in my case, and with families. And everything tends to sort itself out when people are safe and guided and so
Mm,
on. And, to your comment about, putting things to words, I should be very clear. I don't do it for the reader. I do it for myself, right?
yeah,
Because I don't have the words. And I think I've said this before here, whenever I'm going into a meeting with parents, I'm terrified. I start with panic, and then I have to write a script for myself. And
mm,
for a triennial meeting with all the data and all that kind of stuff, my scripts are 20, 25 pages. For a regular annual meeting, they're 14, 15 pages. And it's down to like, I need to say this, and I need to make sure I say that, and I need to mention this data, and so on. And then I over prepare, and
mm,
I let the parents know. Every parent on my case knows I'm autistic. They know I'm a Gestalt processor. They know I'm promiscuous with care. I'm promiscuous with this genre on Substack, etc. But I'm generous to a fault. And at the end of the meeting, especially if they're new on my caseload, I hand them the script and I say, everything I've said, all the data, everything's here, right? So,
mm,
the same thing I did in the conference. I don't want you to take notes. I want to build a relationship. I want to build that field so that we can have conversation, so we can be attuned and understand and be there for one another. And writing interrupts that. So I don't want that. I do that with my students. Everything you need is in the computer. All the written down stuff is there. Let's have conversation. Let's have community. And so I think the Substack is just kind of a version of that where I can park
mm.
all of this stuff for myself for later. And sometimes Teresa, she will ask me like, hey, I need an answer to this, but I don't need 10 articles. I just need a straight answer. Right. And I'm like, well, I've already written six about that. So maybe here comes the seventh. I don't know. But I think, a lot of the work that I've done is because language is not normal for me. But I live in a world that requires it. And
Yeah.
so I write a lot. And I think the acceleration over the last few years, things have become clearer in my mind thanks to, circumstances and safety and so on, where
Yeah.
my brain can sit down. But writing is not natural and normal. That's why I do a lot of yelling at the computer. And I showed students, this is my process. This is what I do.
Hmm.
I use text to speech. I use speech to text. Um,
Yeah.
and I use the tech to organize my thoughts. But the writing is mine. The thoughts are
Yeah.
mine. The words are mine. Um, and I can share my mentor texts, the sources that I've kind of modeled my work on with
Mm.
students if they're interested, but they're all kind of old, right? Like, oh, I don't want to read that stuff anyways. Um, but some of that comes out in like test prep and lectures on stuff where
Yeah.
right now we're preparing for a standardized test that every student in the 11th grade in California will take. And it is the test that situates them in college. What maths class will you take first? What English class will you take first? And so if you do average or well, then you will take, the English 101 and pre-calculus. But if you don't, then you start in the remedial side and you have to pay time and money to get to that starting point. And so I try to explain to him. And then we do little sessions on, the stuff that comes up, the Charles Mackay and his dreary Scottish poetry and how to penetrate that and answer questions and stuff as a Gestalt mind. And so my kids tend to do fairly well with that kind of intentional, purposeful instruction about how to navigate in a world not designed for you. But
Mm.
that's really what the work is about for me in writing it all down is just there's so much of it. So I have to store it somewhere and I might as well give it to you and make it be useful to you.
So when is the book going to come out, Jamie?
Oh my jeez. Well, I just wrote that out there, right?
Okay.
I I kind of was cheeky about, there is no contract, there is no publisher, there is no idea. I have another book half written, The Story of Maths, to support my developmental mathematics learning center. Then this one pops into my head alongside it, and it's almost demanding, primacy. Like, do me first, do me first. So I don't know, and with publishing, it's very difficult. I'm sure you're aware a bit, but when you enter negotiations, it's always the first question. How many books do you sell in the first quarter? And if you don't hit a certain threshold, they're not interested.
Yeah.
Um,
Have you
so
ever
I
thought
don't
of
know where this might
self-publishing?
land. Well, I've done that with the poetry and the short fiction, but I don't have time to market it. I don't have time to distribute it, and um, self-publishing, you have to do all the work, and so I don't have time for that. I can park it somewhere and people can do it. I'm aware of a couple of autistic Gestalt processors who have kind of foundations on stuff, and they do some publishing, and I've yet to talk to them about any of this, but I was thinking that might be an avenue, and
Mm,
I've looked at like Kindle Direct and the Amazon stuff, and it's just piracy. It's
yeah.
absolutely highway robbery to deal with these people, and you make no money out of it. Not that I'm really interested in the money, but
No, no.
um, they dictate the price, and I know with my textbooks, my publisher's gracious. They're very nice, and they work out deals with libraries and stuff. And so I know there was a time when somebody in Canada was like, well, I really need it, but we're in a bad way. And I want to be able to show it to my school. And so the publisher worked with the county library and said, here we have a licensing deal. So now the family can have it checked out of the library. And then they can walk it over and say, see, published is published, right? And my child needs this support and stuff. So I like that they do that. And from that standpoint, I'm happy, but this is not what they do, so it would not be there. But we'll see. We'll see. I mean, that's 24 chapters and an epilogue and a prologue, and so you're at
Yeah.
26. How much will you read? I think the longest thing I've ever written was under contract. It was a textbook, and it was almost 800 pages on imaging science, and it's a lot of work writing that
It
that
certainly is.
load. But I want to make this to like the technical stuff, all of my technical writings and stuff that I did for the government and under contract. It's necessarily scientific and dense. This needs to be readable. It needs to be approachable. It needs to be accessible to parents
Mm,
as well as
yeah.
professionals. And so there is a different kind of way of writing that. And it takes a bit more time and care, I think, than
Yeah.
the writing and the sciences and stuff. Um,
Well, I think I speak for everyone when I say that it's something that we're very much looking forward to. And I feel on that note, we probably need to stop there today. I didn't need my squirrel, but it's as always, we could keep going. So thank you again, and I will see you next week.
Aye, it's been wonderful, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye.
Bye bye.